what's going on in Ukraine, not just because we're investors, but because we care and we live in this world. The big question is whether or not, and to what extent, and precisely how what's going on in Ukraine is going to change the world. And I think at this point, it's pretty clear it is going to change the world. But predicting exactly how is a tricky business. There's a lot of talk about increased focus on energy security. Seems a natural product of what's going on there. The question, right, is whether or not people have adequate supply, and more to the point, adequate, secure and stable supply of the energy they need to run their economies. And I don't have any great predictions there, although we, like others, realize that because the developed world, or at least parts of the developed world, are deeply ambivalent about fossil fuels, the typical response you'd see might not come as fast as it otherwise would. And what I'm getting at here is we might have reluctance to invest aggressively in fossil fuel development. So how exactly this gets sorted out is unclear, and we're going to have to deal with it as a people. The other topic that comes up is just a broader geopolitical realignment, and again, some sort of change to the status quo seems inevitable, but exactly what it means is, again, very, very hard to know. Globalization is here to stay, but that doesn't mean we couldn't see somewhat less globalization. And even a shift like that could have, a significant impact on the global economy and profound impacts on particular industries and companies. So we are watching closely, like everyone else. The nice thing about this is that we don't have to make macro predictions. We just have to assemble a portfolio of 20 some odd businesses whose prospects we believe in. But absolutely, this is something we keep in our peripheral vision.
It's interesting. You didn't discuss inflation.
It's true, I didn't. Perhaps I should have. I guess the reason I didn't mention is I think of inflation as something that was emerging even prior to Ukraine. And you're right, what's going on there is probably going to exacerbate it. Certainly in the short term, it's exacerbating it. The question is whether or not it exacerbates it in the long run. And I suppose that depends on the extent to which what's happening in the Ukraine has lasting impacts on the supply chain, on the energy markets, and on the geopolitical stage. But again, I think inflation was already on the rise. We lived through a remarkable period, not just over the past 5 years, but 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years where we were exporting deflation from the developing world. And that gave us the freedom to keep prices low and also at the same time run very, very loose monetary policy. I want to stay away from making any specific predictions, but I would just point out that is not the natural order of things necessarily. And so we saw inflation building throughout parts of the pandemic. It seems to be continuing, and no one around here would be surprised if that's a force that we're going to be facing for a long time to come. In terms of how we're positioning the portfolio vis-a-vis inflation, I would just say we're not using a specific view on inflation to drive our investment decisions. We think in the long run, the best way to protect yourself from inflation is to own productive businesses that have strong competitive advantages and that in general are able to pass along increased prices to their customers. It's not a guarantee of outperformance vis-a-vis inflation over any shorter period of time, but in the long run, that's where you want to be.